His message came in soft and loving while he was kissing another woman. My phone lit up in my hand, and for one foolish second, I let my mouth curve into the same small smile I had worn for years whenever Gerald decided to sound tender through a screen. "I'm stuck at work. Happy 35th anniversary, babe." That was what he sent me. Those exact words. And while I was still looking at them, still sitting there in the low amber light of that restaurant with my purse beside me and a glass of water sweating into the linen, my husband was 3 tables away, leaning across another table like he had nowhere else in the world to be, pressing his mouth to a woman who should never have been in his arms. The room did not go silent the way people describe shock. It got louder. Forks touched plates. Somebody laughed near the bar. A server walked past carrying a tray of drinks that trembled only because my own hand had started to shake. I did not breathe right for a moment. I just stared, my eyes trying to make the scene become something else. A misunderstanding, a bad angle, a cruel resemblance. I have lived long enough to know that sometimes the mind rushes ahead of the truth, and sometimes it drags behind it. Mine dragged. It sat there stubborn and slow while my body understood before I did that something inside my life had just split clean through. My name is Hope Grayson, and by the time that message came through, I had already spent half an hour alone at a table meant for 2. I had come early on purpose. 35 years of marriage teaches a woman how to prepare her face before disappointment arrives. I had told myself traffic was bad. I had told myself work had run over. I had told myself that men who spend decades being depended on begin to think punctuality is a luxury instead of a courtesy. I had told myself a lot of things in those 30 minutes, because sometimes the little lies you tell yourself are the only things keeping the larger ones from getting in. I looked back down at his text and then up again, just to punish myself with certainty. He was still there. Dark jacket. Silver at his temples, catching the light. One elbow near the candle stand. A posture I knew too well. Relaxed, possessive, familiar. The kind of ease a man wears when he has no fear of being seen. And the woman across from him was not pulling away. She wasn't startled or ashamed. She leaned toward him like she belonged in that space. Then she turned her head just slightly, on enough for the light to catch the side of her face, and my breath stopped so hard it felt like somebody had gripped the inside of my throat. Talia. My daughter-in-law. Jordan's wife. The woman who had stood in my kitchen 4 nights earlier with one hand around a mug of tea, smiling politely while telling me she hoped this anniversary finally gave Gerald a chance to rest because he had been working so hard lately. I remembered those words as clearly as if she had whispered them into my ear right there at the table, working so hard lately. I stared at her mouth, still soft from kissing my husband, and something cold and sharp slid through me so neatly it almost felt clean. I did not cry. Tears belong to moments when pain still needs permission. This one didn't. This one entered like fact. A waiter came by to ask whether I wanted a few more minutes before ordering, and I heard myself say yes in a voice so steady it frightened me. He nodded and walked away. Across the room, Gerald reached for her hand, not quickly, not carelessly, like he had done it before, like there was a rhythm to them I had simply never been meant to see. Right there in the middle of that table for 2, with my wedding ring warm against the stem of my glass, I understood that loneliness can sit in a restaurant wearing a pressed blouse and lipstick and still look perfectly composed. If you're listening to me right now, tell me what time it is where you are. I mean that. Sometimes it helps to know exactly when another heart is sitting with yours. I kept watching them, because once truth shows its face, looking away does not make you innocent again. Gerald said something that made her lower her eyes and smile, not a bright smile, a private one, familiar, the kind that comes after months, not moments. My stomach turned slowly like it was trying not to alarm the rest of me too soon. I looked again at the text on my phone. Happy 35th anniversary, babe. The cruelty of it was not even in the lie. It was in the ease. Talia lifted her face once more, and this time there was no angle left to hide behind. My chair legs scraped hard against the floor as I pushed myself up. I didn't think. I reacted. The scrape of my chair was still hanging in the air when my body moved before the rest of me caught up. 1 second I was at that table with my phone still glowing in my hand, and the next I was stepping out from behind my chair with all the heat in my chest, rising so fast it felt dangerous. My legs were unsteady, but not weak. There is a kind of shock that does not freeze a woman. It drives her forward. I was not trying to make a scene. I was trying to reach the truth with my own eyes before somebody could smooth it over and tell me I had misunderstood what I had plainly seen. I took 2 steps toward them, maybe 3. I do not remember whether I left my purse on the chair or took it with me. I only remember the pressure in my ears and the strange way the room seemed to tilt around the edges, while the center of it stayed painfully clear. Gerald was still angled toward Talia, one hand near the table, his face turned enough for me to see the ease in it. Not alarm, not guilt. Ease. That was the thing making my stomach churn harder than the kiss itself. Ease meant comfort. Ease meant repetition. The ease meant this was not the first line they had crossed, just the first one I had caught. Then a hand touched my arm, not hard, not rude, just enough to stop my next step. I turned so quickly I nearly jerked away before I saw it was the waiter from earlier, the same one who had asked whether I needed more time before ordering. Up close, he looked younger than I first thought. Maybe early 30s. Clean apron, careful face, the kind of expression people wear when they are trying to prevent a fall without embarrassing the person stumbling. He lowered his voice immediately. "Ma'am, please, just give it a second." My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Move." He did not tighten his grip. In fact, his hand slipped back at once, but he didn't step aside either. He leaned in slightly, not close enough to offend me. Just close enough that I didn't have to strain to hear him over the clink of dishes and the low hum of voices around us. "I've seen them here before," he said. "Please, stay calm." Everything in me went hot, then cold. For a second, I simply stared at him. Out of all the things I expected that night, those words were nowhere on the list. Seen them here before. Not once. Not accidentally. Before. The floor beneath me felt suddenly less steady than it had a moment earlier, and that frightened me more than my anger did. Because anger, I understood. Anger had shape. This new thing did not. It spread. "You've seen who here before?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. His eyes flicked past me toward their table and then back to mine, quick and uneasy. "I'm sorry," he said, and I could hear that he meant it. "I just think if you go over there right now, you'll regret it." Regret it. The nerve of that sentence should have sent me straight past him. Instead, it snagged somewhere deep, because people do not say things like that unless they believe something worse is still unfolding. I looked over my shoulder. Gerald had shifted back in his seat. Talia was saying something to him, low and close, her face composed in a way that made my skin crawl. There was no panic between them, no sudden separation, no guilty scanning of the room. They were still comfortable, still settled, still acting like two people who had arrived there together and expected the night to continue. That was what slowed me down. If I had stormed over then, I would have brought my pain to a table they were clearly prepared to leave at any second. I would have given them chaos, and chaos is a gift to liars. It lets them grab at confusion and call it explanation. The waiter stepped back first, careful, as if he knew he had already crossed into dangerous territory by speaking at all. "I'm sorry," he said again. I looked from him to them and back once more. My palms were damp, my face felt hot. But underneath all of that, beneath the humiliation and the rage and the sick feeling still crawling through my chest, something else had started to form. Attention. I turned around slowly and walked back to my table. When I sat down, I did it without taking my eyes off them, and then I decided to watch. The kiss wasn't the worst part. I learned that sitting perfectly still, or with my hands folded too neatly in my lap and my heart beating hard enough to make the edges of the room feel thin. Once I sat back down, something in me changed. Attention. I watched the way Gerald settled deeper into his chair, like a man who had already crossed the line and found it easier to stay there than return. I watched the way Talia lowered her voice when she spoke to him. Her posture relaxed in a way that didn't belong to secrecy anymore. And what unsettled me most was not what they were doing. It was what they were not doing. They were not checking the room, not once, not the door, not the tables, not the mirrors behind the bar. People hiding something look over their shoulders. People who feel safe don't. That was when I understood the waiter hadn't stopped me to protect them. He had stopped me because something else was coming, and if I had walked over, I would have missed it. That realization had just settled into me when a man approached their table. He didn't arrive like a stranger trying to find his place. He moved with quiet certainty, the kind that belongs to someone expected, not hurried, not cautious, just precise. He wore a dark jacket over a pale shirt, no tie, no fuss, and something about the way he held the leather portfolio under his arm tightened something low in my chest. Not fear, recognition. My body recognized him before my mind did, and my stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy anymore. Familiarity doesn't always come with a name. Sometimes it arrives first, taps you lightly, and waits for your mind to catch up. Then he stepped fully into the light, and I knew him. Not as a doctor standing over a hospital bed, as a man I had seen once before in a very different setting. 2 years earlier, sitting across from Gerald in a private office downtown, when my husband said he needed independent verification on something financial that had made him uneasy. The man had introduced himself then as someone who handled private lab coordination for clients who preferred discretion. Paternity testing, medical confirmations, things people didn't want moving through their regular doctors, not treatment, verification. His name was Leonard Pike, not our family doctor. Something else entirely. That distinction mattered more than anything else in that moment, because it meant this wasn't casual. And then it wasn't accidental. Gerald rose halfway from his seat when he reached the table, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him, without drawing attention. The kind of movement practiced between men who have met like this before. No introductions, no hesitation, no explanation offered to Talia because she didn't need one. She was already part of whatever this was. Leonard didn't greet them the way people greet each other in public. No handshake extended outward. No smile meant for the room. He simply opened the portfolio and removed a sealed brown envelope. Flat, unmarked, deliberate, not careless, controlled. The kind of public exchange people choose when they believe no one in the room has any reason to look twice. He placed it directly into Gerald's hand, not to both of them, not even angled toward her, to Gerald. My fingers tightened against the table again, slower this time. Not from shock, from recognition of structure. This wasn't information being shared, it was something being delivered, and it had been arranged. There was no conversation around it, no explanation, no hesitation about whether this was the right place. That told me more than anything written inside that envelope ever could. This had already been discussed somewhere else. This was just the confirmation. Gerald didn't wait. That was the detail that settled it deeper in me. A man receiving unexpected news slows down. He prepares himself. He reads carefully, cautiously, as if the words might shift under his eyes. Gerald didn't do any of that. He opened the envelope immediately, slid the papers out with one smooth motion, and scanned them the way a man searches for a single answer he has already been living with. His eyes moved quickly, stopped, moved again. Then he exhaled, not heavily, not dramatically, just enough. Relief. Not relief the way a man greets good news. Relief the way a man releases a fear he has already been living with. And then I heard him. Low, clear, certain. So it's confirmed, not discovered, not questioned, confirmed. The word settled into me with a kind of cold clarity that pushed everything else aside. This wasn't a beginning. It wasn't even a turning point. It was the closing of a loop that had already been running long before I ever walked into that restaurant. I felt something shift inside my chest then, not break, not yet, but align. Why, because now I understood something I hadn't fully grasped when I first saw them. They weren't improvising. They were operating inside a plan. This wasn't a mistake unfolding. It was a structure revealing itself. Leonard said something in return, too low for me to catch, but Gerald nodded once, already moving past whatever explanation had been given. Talia didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't lean in to read. She didn't need to. She already knew what the papers would say. She just watched him, still, prepared, like she had been waiting for this moment to arrive. That was the part that stayed with me, not her silence, her lack of curiosity. I glanced down at my phone for a second, the anniversary message still sitting there like something obscene dressed up as tenderness. Happy 35th anniversary, babe. And the ease of that lie sat heavier now than the betrayal itself. Then I looked back. Gerald was already pushing his chair away, not abruptly, not nervously, deliberately. He stood with the papers still in his hand and turned toward her, closing the small distance between them like a man stepping into a space he had already claimed. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. If I had stood up when my body first told me to, I would have walked into noise and missed the truth entirely. He didn't act like a man hiding something. He acted like a man relieved. That was the detail that settled it in my body before my mind finished catching up. Gerald did not glance around the room. He did not lower his head or shift his shoulders, like someone trying to shrink himself into less space. And he stepped toward her with the kind of ease that belongs to repetition, not risk. I watched him from across the room, my fingers resting lightly against the table now, no longer gripping, no longer shaking. Something inside me had gone still in a way that felt almost deliberate. Talia did not move away. That mattered just as much. She stayed seated, her back straight, her face tilted slightly upward toward him, her hands resting close to her lap as if she already knew exactly where he was about to place his. There was no confusion between them, no misreading, no hesitation that might suggest this was the first time their bodies had crossed into this kind of closeness. Whatever this was, it had already been practiced enough to lose its edges. Gerald stopped beside her chair, not close enough to make a spectacle, just close enough to belong there. His hand moved slowly, not searching, not unsure, and came to rest against her stomach. Light, familiar. Not the touch of a man testing boundaries, but the touch of a man returning to something he recognized. I felt my breath shorten, not in panic, but in something tighter, more precise. My eyes fixed on that single point where his hand met her body, and the rest of the room began to fade in importance. There was a pause. It wasn't long, but it was intentional. The kind of pause that exists between people who understand each other without needing to fill silence with words. Talia's shoulders softened just slightly beneath his touch. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else in that room would notice. But I noticed. When you've lived with a man for 35 years, and you learn the language of his hands, and I knew, in that quiet second, that he had touched her like that before. Then he bent, not quickly, not nervously. He leaned down with care, lowering himself just enough to press his mouth against the place his hand had settled. It was not a show. There was no performance in it, no exaggerated tenderness meant for an audience. It was quiet, controlled, almost private, despite the room full of people around them. He kissed her stomach, and in that moment everything aligned so cleanly it made my chest feel hollow. The envelope, the lab. The way you follow something you already know is true, but have not yet said out loud. And a man doesn't place his hand there like that unless the possibility has already been discussed. A man doesn't look relieved unless the outcome mattered to him. A man doesn't arrange confirmation unless he was part of the question. There are realizations that arrive like storms, loud and chaotic. And there are others that enter like a blade, precise and silent. This one cut through me without noise. She was pregnant. That was the first truth. And the second did not arrive as a guess. It settled, quietly. He had been waiting for that confirmation, not hoping, waiting. This was not a mistake they were trying to recover from. It was not something new they were struggling to understand. The test had already been taken. The possibility had already been lived with. This meeting, this envelope, and this quiet exchange, it was not the beginning of anything. It was the continuation. A strange calm spread through me then, steadying my hands, smoothing the sharp edges of what I was seeing into something I could hold without breaking apart. I realized, with a clarity that felt almost cruel, that I was no longer watching an affair. I was watching a pattern, something built, something maintained, something that had existed long enough to become comfortable. Gerald straightened slowly, his hand lingering for just a second longer before he let it fall away. Talia looked up at him again, and there was something in her expression that was not fear and not guilt. It was agreement. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken because it has already been decided elsewhere. I did not need to see anything else. Wait, there are moments when staying becomes a kind of surrender, when the longer you sit in a place, the more you allow it to rewrite what you know to be true. I had seen enough to understand the shape of what had been hidden from me, and I had no intention of letting that shape settle into something I accepted. For the first time that night, I wasn't reacting to them anymore. I was reading them. I reached for my purse without looking down. The chair moved back quietly this time when I stood. No scrape, no sound that might draw attention. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Across the room, Gerald was still standing beside her, the envelope in his hand, his posture relaxed in a way that no longer belonged to me. I turned and walked out. Not a word spoken. Some betrayals don't need noise. They need time. By the time I got home, the night air had cooled, but my skin still felt hot in places that had nothing to do with weather. I let myself into the house as quietly as if I were the one sneaking back from something shameful. The porch light was on. I had left it on out of habit before heading to dinner, and seeing it there waiting for me made something ache low in my chest. That little yellow light had greeted me home through funerals, graduations, storms, and ordinary Tuesdays. It had outlasted arguments and sickness and years when Gerald and I could barely speak without one of us sounding tired. Tonight it watched me walk in alone. I set my purse on the entry table and stood still for a moment, listening. The house had its usual sounds, the refrigerator humming faintly from the kitchen. The old clock in the hallway moving forward with the same patient certainty it had always had. And then, something small caught my attention. Gerald's shoes were not by the door. They were usually there by this hour, angled slightly toward the wall, never perfectly straight, like he had meant to come back and fix them, but never did. Tonight that space was empty. It wasn't proof of anything. But it didn't belong to the version of the evening he would later describe. I let that sit where it was and moved on. Nothing around me had shifted. That was the insult of it. My marriage had cracked open in public, and the walls still stood there acting like they knew nothing. I went to the bathroom first and looked at myself in the mirror over the sink. My lipstick had faded at the center. My eyes looked too bright. Not from tears, but from the work of holding them back. I reached for a washcloth, ran it under cool water, and pressed it gently to the sides of my face, not because I was crying, because I needed to lower the heat. I needed my body to stop behaving like it might reveal me before I was ready. That was the first decision I made that night. Not to forgive, not to understand, to conceal. I changed out of my dinner clothes and put on one of the soft knit sets I wore around the house when I wanted comfort without effort. Then I went downstairs and turned on the lamp in the den instead of the overhead light. A softer room asks fewer questions. I sat in my usual chair with a book open in my lap, though I never read a single line. I was not waiting for Gerald to come home. I was preparing the version of myself he would meet when he did. And when I heard his key in the door, my heart gave one hard thud and then settled. That frightened me too. He came in with the easy weight of a man returning from an ordinary day. Not rushed, not distracted. Ordinary. He loosened his tie as he walked through the foyer and looked toward the den when he saw the lamp on. "There you are," he said, like I had merely beaten him home from some harmless inconvenience. I lifted my eyes from the open book and gave him a small smile that cost me more than anger would have. "I'm here." He crossed the room and bent to kiss my cheek. I let him. That may sound small to some people, but women who have lived long enough know the violence of staying still when every nerve in your body wants to recoil. And his mouth touched my skin with the same casual affection it had used for years. And for just a second, he hesitated. Not enough for anyone who wasn't watching to notice. But I was watching now. A pause no longer than a breath. Then it was gone. I kept my face composed. I even let my hand rise briefly to his wrist, a gesture so natural he did not question it. "Work was a mess," he said, dropping into the chair across from me. "Then traffic got ridiculous. I hated missing tonight." His voice was smooth, not overworked, not over-explaining. That part made it worse. A clumsy liar leaves evidence in panic. Gerald had come home polished. I nodded once. "I figured something held you up." He exhaled, grateful for the ease I handed him. Too grateful. "We'll celebrate properly this weekend," he said. "I'll make it up to you." We. That word moved through me like something spoiled. I looked at him then, really looked at him, but not the way I had before. Not as the man I chose over my family's doubts all those years ago. Not as the father who taught Jordan how to shave, or the husband who remembered I liked my coffee stronger on bad mornings. I looked at him as if he were a stranger whose habits I needed to learn quickly for my own protection. And once I did that, the whole room changed. His loosened tie on the arm of the chair, the faint smell of cologne sitting over something he hadn't fully washed away, the ease in his shoulder him because confrontation would have served my pain, not my understanding. Pain wants release. Understanding wants time. So I kept my voice level, asked whether he had eaten, and listened to him answer with a lie built so smoothly into his breathing it might have fooled any woman who had not already seen the truth with her own eyes. That was the second decision I made that night. I would not ask him for honesty. I would study him instead. Because if this was what I saw, how long had it been happening? I didn't start searching. I started remembering. That is an uglier thing in some ways. Searching gives you the dignity of action. Remembering forces you to sit still while old moments rise up one by one and ask why you let them pass as ordinary. The morning after that anniversary dinner, I woke before Gerald and lay there in the dim blue quiet of our bedroom, listening to him breathe beside me like a man untouched by anything. I turned my head slightly. Now his phone was on the nightstand, face down. Gerald never slept with his phone face down, not once in 35 years. I looked at it for a second longer than I meant to, then looked away, because I wasn't ready to touch anything yet. I stared at the ceiling and felt my mind begin to move backward on its own, not wildly, not emotionally, but with a steadiness that felt almost cruel. Once truth has shown itself, memory stops dressing up in kindness. Gerald left for work a little after 7. Same routine, same measured pace, same cufflinks on the dresser, same aftershave in the bathroom air, same brief kiss on my forehead before he walked out. Too same. That was the problem. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and watched him back down the driveway, one hand loose on the wheel, calm as Sunday morning. Why, there was something offensive in how practiced his normalcy was. A man who panics can be caught. A man who settles deeper into routine is harder to shake loose. After he left, I did not tear through drawers or go digging through his pockets like a woman in a cheap television drama. That was never going to be me. I wiped down the kitchen counters, watered the fern by the dining room window, and folded the throw blanket from the den. My hands kept moving, while my mind kept returning to moments I had filed away as small annoyances, little disappointments, things not worth turning into arguments. One by one, they came back with different faces. The late calls were the first thing. Gerald had developed a habit over the last year of stepping outside to finish something on his phone after dinner. Not every night. Just enough to feel incidental. He always said work had gotten more demanding, that people expected answers too quickly, that staying reachable was part of keeping his standing. I had believed him. Because men like Gerald build entire identities around being needed. But now I remembered something I hadn't let myself notice before. He never took those calls when Jordan was home, only when the house was thinner. That realization sat heavier than I expected. Jordan worked long shifts often enough that family dinners had become harder to coordinate. Talia would sometimes say she couldn't make it because she had errands, a migraine, a friend in town, something to return before stores closed. Little reasons, polite reasons. But once I let the dates arrange themselves in my head, they stopped feeling separate. And there had been too many nights when Gerald was delayed and Talia was busy at the same time. Too many overlaps, too much neatness. I went to the study that afternoon and opened the drawer where we kept household account statements. I was not rifling through evidence. I was checking what had always been mine to check. Gerald handled most of the larger financial decisions because somewhere along the years I had allowed efficiency to masquerade as trust. I found the last few bank summaries clipped neatly together, just as I expected. At first glance, nothing screamed at me. No enormous transfers, no absurd purchases. But betrayal rarely begins in large gestures. It begins in repetition. There were withdrawals. Not large enough to trigger alarm, just consistent enough to feel intentional. I flipped one page, then another, in same spacing, same amounts, same quiet disappearance of money, lunch meetings, gifts, work expenses he did not want tied up waiting for reimbursement. I could hear his explanations before he even gave them. That was what 35 years buys you, not just memories. Predictable lies. What made my stomach tighten was not one withdrawal by itself. It was the pattern. Money leaving quietly, the same way he left explanations behind for me to tidy up myself. I set the papers down and sat back, because something else had just clicked into place. The nights he came home without the usual irritation about traffic. The evenings he seemed settled, not tired, not rushed. Settled. I had called that maturity once. Now I recognized it for what it was. Completion. By late afternoon, I was no longer replaying one night at a restaurant. I was rewalking months of my own life with the lights finally on. Talia canceling at the last minute and sounding too smooth about it. Gerald arriving home later than usual and carrying no frustration from the traffic he claimed to hate. The way he had once defended her, too quickly, when Jordan mentioned she seemed distracted lately. At the time, I thought he was being kind. Now I heard something else in it. Claim. Nothing I remembered stood up alone as proof. That was what made it dangerous. It had been built the way decent-looking rot works through wood, quietly beneath polish, until one day your hand presses down and the whole thing gives. And I sat at the dining table as evening lowered itself against the windows and understood something I had not wanted to know. This wasn't sudden. This didn't start recently. And the worst part was, I had been living inside it while it was being built. I went back, not for answers, for confirmation. By then, answers had already started arranging themselves in my head whether I invited them or not. What I needed was something colder, something outside of me. Memory can be argued with. Hurt can be dismissed. A woman can be told she is emotional, bitter, suspicious, dramatic. All those little words people use when they want to push truth back into the dark until it behaves itself again. I did not need my own instincts that day. I needed another pair of eyes. I went to the restaurant just after lunch, now early enough that the dinner crowd had not started building, and late enough that the place still carried the faint after smell of coffee, polish, and yesterday's expensive choices. The hostess greeted me with a professional smile and asked whether I wanted a table. I said no. My voice sounded calm, almost detached, and that unsettled me more than trembling would have. "I'm looking for one of your servers," I said. He was working here 2 nights ago. Tall, light brown skin, close-cut beard. He spoke to me near the back dining room. For half a second, something flickered in her face. Recognition, then caution. "Let me check," she said. I stood near the host stand with my purse looped over my forearm and watched people move through the room in soft patterns of routine. Water glasses set down. Men in shirt sleeves talking over late business lunches. A woman laughing too loudly beside the window. Ordinary life has a way of insulting you after betrayal. It keeps moving as if your private disaster should have the decency to stay private. A few minutes later, he came out from a side hallway. Without the evening rush around him, he looked even younger than I remembered. Nervous, too. His apron was gone this time, replaced by a black button-down with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He slowed when he saw me, and in that pause, I knew he had hoped I would not come back. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "We need to talk," I said. He glanced toward the hostess, then toward a manager near the bar, weighing something in his head. "I'm on break for 10 minutes, he said at last. "There's a small patio around the side, colored umbrellas. Tucked away from the front entrance." He stayed standing. So did I. That, more than anything, made the moment feel honest. Neither of us was comfortable enough to sit in it. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you," I said. His jaw shifted once. I figured. "I need the truth." He looked down at his hands before answering, and that hesitation gave me more confidence than smoothness would have. Smooth men protect themselves first. Hesitant people are usually trying to decide how much decency they can afford. "I shouldn't really be involved," he said. "You already involved yourself that night." He took that without argument. "Because you were about to walk into something bad." "Something bad," I repeated. "My husband kissing my son's wife in a restaurant?" His eyes lifted to mine then, and whatever restraint he had been using loosened just enough for me to see the pity underneath it. I hated pity, but I trusted it more than politeness. "They've been here before," he said. I did not blink. "How long?" He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Months." The word did not hit me like a blow. It landed heavier than that, more final. Months meant habits. Months meant planning. Months meant birthdays, Sunday calls, family dinners, all threaded through with a second life moving quietly beneath them. "They usually asked for the same section," he continued. "Back area, away from the windows. Not hidden exactly. Just not noticeable." "Always together?" He hesitated again, then nodded. "Always." I looked past him toward the fence at the edge of the patio, forcing my face not to move before I turned back. And you never thought to say anything. That was unfair, and I knew it as soon as I said it. But hurt makes a woman reach for blame anywhere it can land cleanly. His expression tightened, though he stayed respectful. I thought you knew. There it was, not suspicion, not gossip, assumption. The kind of assumption people make only when two people have been comfortable in public long enough to stop looking like a secret and start looking like an arrangement. I let the silence stretch between us, and in that silence, the last soft corner of denial inside me finally gave way. He shifted his weight and lowered his voice even further. The other night wasn't unusual, he said. That's why I stopped you. I knew something else was coming. They don't come here like people doing something reckless. They come here like people with a routine. Then he looked at me fully. No polite distance left in it now, and said the one thing I could not unhear. It wasn't the first time. Doctors don't guess. They confirm what's already been tested. That truth stayed with me all the way home from the restaurant after speaking to the waiter. It sat beside me in the car like a second passenger, quiet and impossible to ignore. By then, I had enough to know I was not dealing with one reckless affair or one ugly lapse in judgment. Months. That was what he said. Months of private dinners, careful seating, practiced comfort. But even that was not the part my mind kept circling. Yeah, it kept returning to the envelope, to Leonard Pike standing at that table without surprise, to Gerald opening those papers like a man collecting something he had already been living with, to those 5 words. So it's confirmed. I sat in my car for a long time in the driveway, one hand still resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, the silence inside the car louder than anything outside it. At some point, I realized I was still holding my keys too tightly. I loosened my grip slowly, because rushing would have been a mistake. Some women, when they are betrayed, begin hunting through phones and drawers and pockets right away. I understood that instinct now. I felt it at the edges of me. But something steadier held me in place. If I moved too fast, I would start collecting pieces before I understood the shape. And shape matters. Name something too soon and it learns how to hide inside your mistake. So I stayed where I was and replayed the restaurant scene in the strictest order I could force my mind into. Not emotionally, precisely. Gerald and Talia, already at ease. The waiter, certain enough to stop me. Leonard Pike arriving without hesitation. The envelope placed, not offered. Gerald opening it without pause. So it's confirmed. And then his hand on her stomach. Not tentative, not questioning. Familiar. I closed my eyes and let the sequence run again. Slower this time. Because something in it had been wrong from the beginning. Not emotionally, structurally. That exchange had not behaved like news. It had behaved like completion. Leonard Pike had not come to tell them something new. And he had come to finalize something already in motion. That distinction settled deeper than anything else, because it meant the question had already been asked somewhere else, privately, quietly, without me. The envelope had not been the beginning. It had been the answer. And the way it moved, from his hand to Gerald's, without explanation, without shared reading, without even the suggestion that she needed to see it, tightened something in my chest. The papers had gone to Gerald, not Talia, not both of them. Gerald. That meant his role was not incidental. He had not been included. He had been responsible. He had arranged it, paid for it, waited on it. The word confirmed did the rest. Confirmed meant a test had already been taken. Confirmed meant time had passed between question and answer. While confirmed meant he had been living with that possibility long enough to need proof. And when I followed that line all the way through, it stopped being something I could soften. He had not been surprised. He had been relieved. I opened my eyes slowly. Because once that settled, everything else adjusted around it. The way she didn't lean in to read the paper, the way she watched him instead, the way neither of them spoke. They already knew, both of them. The meeting wasn't about discovery. It was about confirmation. I finally got out of the car and walked into the house with that thought pressing against my ribs. Gerald was not home yet. Good. I needed the room's quiet. I needed to hear my own thinking without his voice moving through the air, pretending everything was still ordinary. Then I set my keys in the bowl by the door and stood in the kitchen, staring at the fruit bowl on the counter, the folded dish towel by the sink, ordinary things holding their shape, while something underneath them had already shifted. Then it came together, not in pieces, all at once. They were not living like people hoping not to get caught. They were living like people who believed they wouldn't, organizing it, scheduling it, containing it, confirming it, managing it. I stood there in my own kitchen and felt something in me move past hurt into something colder, clearer. For the first time since that night began, I understood the shape of what I was dealing with. They weren't hiding it. They were managing it. Some truths don't break hearts. They shatter foundations. I waited 2 weeks before calling Jordan, and in every one of those days asked something ugly of me, not because I doubted what I had seen. Doubt had already died. What remained was timing. Timing is its own kind of mercy when the truth is sharp enough to split a person open. I knew my son well enough to understand that if I told him too soon, before I had steadied myself, before I had arranged the facts in the order they deserved, my pain would arrive before the truth did. And pain alone is easy to argue with. Truth, if you place it carefully, has fewer places to run. I called him on a Thursday evening just before 6. He answered on the second ring, distracted at first, then warm the moment he heard my voice. "Hey, Ma." There are sounds your children make that never stop belonging to earlier versions of them. Jordan was a grown man with a wife, a mortgage, like in the kind of tired shoulders responsibility gives decent sons. But when he said, "Hey, Ma," like that, I still heard the boy who used to shout for me from the back steps when he scraped a knee and wanted me to say it looked worse than it was. "I need you to meet me," I said. A pause. "Now?" "Yes." He grew quieter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and I hated the ease of that lie even while I used it. "I just need to see you." "Where?" I gave him the name of the restaurant. He was silent long enough for me to picture his face changing, not yet alarmed, but no longer easy either. Gerald and I had spent anniversaries there before. Jordan knew that. He would remember it. That was partly why I chose it. I needed him in the same room where my life had bent into something else. I needed the truth to begin where I first saw it. "I'll be there in 20, he said. When I ended the call, I sat for a moment with the phone still in my hand and let the quiet settle around me. The house was empty except for the old hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak every home makes when it is holding too many years inside its walls. Gerald was still at work, or wherever he called work now, and I was grateful for the distance. I needed to put on my face without anyone watching me do it. I drove to the restaurant with both hands on the wheel and my mind pulled tight. The sky was dimming into that soft evening blue that makes everything look briefly kinder than it is. Inside, the hostess recognized me this time, but did not let recognition rise into conversation. Good. I did not want kindness from strangers. It would have undone something in me I was working too hard to keep intact. I asked for the same section, not the exact table. I was not trying to perform grief for myself, but I wanted the same line of sight, the same hush at the back of the every 10 seconds, like an anxious girl. I was not anxious. I was bracing. Jordan came in right on time. That hurt me more than I expected. He walked in, scanning the room for me, with that open, trusting expression people wear when they still believe the world around them is arranged more or less as they last understood it. Dark jacket over a pale shirt, sleeves rolled once at the wrist. Knew his wedding band catching the light as he adjusted it absently while walking toward me. He looked tired, but not troubled, concerned, but not frightened. He had come because I asked. No suspicion, no defense already loaded into his face. Just trust. That nearly broke me before I even started. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, then slid into the seat across from me with a small frown gathering between his brows. You sounded strange on the phone. I know. He studied me for a moment, trying to read what I had not yet said. Jordan had always been like that, less loud than his father, less eager to fill silence, more willing to wait and see whether a person wanted rescuing or just company. I watched him reach for the water glass the server had set down and take one brief sip, his movement still calm, still ordinary, and his life still standing where I was about to push it. Then he set the glass down and looked at me fully. "Mom," he said more carefully this time, "what's going on?" He didn't get angry. He defended her. That was the first wound of it. Not his raised voice, not accusation, protection. Jordan sat across from me in that dim back section of the restaurant with his hands close to his water glass, his face open in that careful way decent men look when they think bad news is about to involve sickness, debt, or grief. He had not yet stepped into betrayal. He was still standing in the last clean doorway before it. I did not rush him. "I need you to listen all the way through," I said. His frown deepened. "You're scaring me." "I know." That answer unsettled him more than reassurance would have. His shoulders shifted, and I saw him brace without yet understanding for what. Around us, the room moved on in its soft, indifferent way. A couple near the window laughed over something private. Silverware tapped lightly against china. Somewhere behind us, a server apologized for a delayed entree. Life kept making room for ordinary people, while I sat there preparing to hand my son something that would divide his life into before and after. 2 weeks ago, I said. "I came here for my anniversary dinner." He nodded once. "You told me Dad got stuck at work." He texted me that he was stuck at work. Jordan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion yet, in concentration. "I was already seated," I continued, "and while I was sitting here, I looked up and saw your father with someone." That landed. I watched it cross his face in pieces, first confusion, and then disbelief so immediate it almost looked like irritation. "With someone?" he said. "What do you mean, with someone?" "I mean, he wasn't at work." His jaw tightened. "Okay." He leaned back a little, buying himself distance from the sentence. "Okay, maybe he met a client, maybe somebody from the office." He kissed her. The words sat between us without movement. Jordan blinked once, then again. His face emptied in the way people's faces do when the mind rejects what the ear has just heard. "No," he said quietly. I kept my voice level. "Yes. No." This time it came out firmer, but not louder. "Mom, no, Dad wouldn't." He did. His hand moved to the table then, palm flat, not striking it, just anchoring himself. "Who?" I looked at him and understood there was no gentle version left. "Talia." His whole body changed. Did not dramatically. Jordan was not his father. He did not flare outward. He pulled inward first, like the impact had landed somewhere private, and he was trying to contain it before it spread. His mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. Then he gave one short shake of his head. "No. I'm telling you what I saw." "That doesn't make sense." "I know." He leaned forward now, voice still low but sharpened by strain. "No, you don't understand. That doesn't make sense. Talia wouldn't do that. Dad wouldn't do that. You had to have seen something wrong." I let him speak. "She's been stressed lately," he went on. "We both have. If you saw them talking, if something looked—" I said he kissed her. Jordan looked down at the tablecloth like the answer might be written there if he stared hard enough. When he looked back up, that there was anger in him now, but it was not aimed where pain usually aims first. It came toward me dressed as defense. "Why didn't you call me that night?" "Because I needed to be sure of what else I had seen." "What else?" he asked. I heard the danger in those two words. Not curiosity, resistance. The kind that comes when the mind is already building walls faster than truth can climb them. He sat back again and crossed one arm over his chest. "Mom, I'm trying to be respectful, but this is my wife you're talking about." "And your father." His eyes flashed at that. "Good. Let both names sit there. Let the full obscenity of it refuse to split itself into separate griefs." "This is crazy," he said, quieter now. "Did they see you? Did something happen before that? Did Dad upset you and now you're—" He stopped. He stopped because even he heard what he had nearly done, nearly turned me into the problem, nearly offered himself the comfort of disbelief by placing the burden on my hurt instead of their betrayal. I did not punish him for it. Hurt people reach for easier stories first. "I didn't come here to argue with you," I said. My purse was already beside my chair. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, I opened it and reached inside for my phone. Jordan watched my hand, then my face. I unlocked the screen, found what I needed, and held the phone without turning it toward him yet. "Just look." Some truths don't need explanation. I turned the phone toward Jordan and placed it carefully on the table between us, screen facing him, as if setting down something sharp enough to cut whichever hand reached for it first. He did not grab it. For a second, he just stared at the glow of it without moving, his face still holding on to the last scraps of resistance, like a man standing in a doorway while the house behind him burns. Then his eyes dropped, and everything in him changed. The photo was not blurry. That mattered. It hadn't been. When my hand, still holding my phone from reading Gerald's message, lifted without permission from the rest of me, not to document, to confirm. I hadn't even realized I had pressed it until later, but it caught everything. Gerald's hand settled on Talia's stomach, his body angled toward her like that space belonged to him, the way she didn't move, didn't question, didn't resist. And it caught the ease, the familiarity, the kind of closeness that doesn't need to be negotiated because it has already been practiced too many times. A private truth, sitting openly in public. Jordan looked at it once, then again. His fingers came up slowly and dragged the phone closer, as if distance might have been the problem and not what the image showed. The restaurant around us kept moving in low, indifferent rhythms, but our table felt sealed off from it now. I watched my son's eyes travel over details no mother should ever have to watch her child absorb. His father's hand, his wife's body, the intimacy, the familiarity, the proof. He did not speak at first. He swallowed. Then he gave one small shake of his head. Not denial this time, but something weaker and more terrible. The body's last refusal to cooperate with pain before pain forces its way through anyway. "No," he said, but the word had lost its spine. I stayed still. Jordan zoomed in slightly, not because he doubted what he was seeing, but because hurt makes people study the knife after it has already gone in. His mouth tightened, his nostrils flared once. His free hand dropped to his thigh and pressed hard enough that I could see the muscle jump beneath the fabric of his pants. "That's—" He stopped, started again. "That's not—" His voice failed him. I had known it would. There are certain humiliations the body understands before language does. A wife can lie. A father can betray. But when those two truths are trapped inside the same image, words often arrive too late to help. He looked up at me then, and that was the worst part. Not the pain in his face, the confusion, the stunned, childlike disbelief still clinging to the edges of a grown man who had thought the worst thing he might hear that night was that his father had embarrassed the family, not that he had invaded it. I kept my voice low because anything louder would have been cruelty. "She's pregnant." The sentence landed and sat there. Jordan blinked once, very slowly, like the room had shifted and he was trying to steady it with his eyes alone. "No," he said again, but now it sounded less like refusal and more like prayer. "No," she would have told me. I did not soften what came next. Softness can become a lie when the truth is already this brutal. She didn't. His face emptied. I watched him do the math without wanting to. The hand on her stomach, the kiss, the private meeting, on the lab, the timing. The months I had already started stitching together in silence. He did not have all of that yet, not fully, but he had enough. Enough for the shape of it to emerge, enough for shame to begin circling pain like a second predator. I folded my hands together to stop myself from reaching for him too soon. Some grief needs touch. Some needs room to collapse cleanly first. "And the child," I said quietly, "isn't yours." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain it. Because by then, explanation would have been insult. That was the moment it truly hit him. Not because he had not understood before, because hearing it spoken removed his final place to hide. Jordan's entire body went still, so still it frightened me. His chest stopped moving for one long second, then another. His eyes stayed on mine, but they had gone strangely unfocused, as if some vital part of him had stepped backward inside himself and shut a door just to survive the sentence. His lips parted. No sound came out. For one terrible moment, my son forgot how to breathe. We didn't say revenge, but we both understood control. Jordan came back to himself in pieces. First his breath returned, rough and shallow, like his body had remembered at the last second that it still had to keep him alive whether his heart wanted that job or not. Then his hand left the phone. Then his eyes dropped away from me and fixed on the tablecloth in front of him as if he could stitch his life back together by staring at one clean white surface long enough. I did not rush in to fill the silence. Silence was doing honest work at that table. And it was stripping him of whatever softness was left between what he believed and what now stood in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud. Loudness would have meant he still had somewhere outside himself to throw the pain. This was quieter than that. "How long?" I answered the only way I could. Long enough that they were comfortable. His jaw tightened so hard I saw the muscle move near his ear. He pushed back slightly from the table, one hand pressing against his mouth, then dropping, then rising again because he did not know what to do with it. Betrayal is ugly that way. It humiliates the body first. A man can lose language before he loses balance. "I'm going to kill him," he said. It came out flat, not dramatic, not wild, just stripped down to impulse. "No," I said. His eyes snapped up to mine. "Yeah, you expect me to sit with this?" "I expect you to survive it." That landed harder than anything else I had said. I watched it move through him, not softening him, but interrupting the direction of his rage long enough for me to reach him. Jordan looked away again, and when he did, I saw his father in him for a moment, not in character, but in the line of his face when he was trying to bury emotion under control. The difference was that Gerald used control to conceal. Jordan was trying to use it not to come apart in public. "She let me plan a future with her," he said after a long silence. "She sat across from me, ate with me, slept beside me." I kept still. And him, he gave one short, ugly laugh with no humor in it at all. My own father. The words seemed to disgust him once they were spoken. Good. And some truths need to sound monstrous out loud before a person can stop negotiating with them inside. A server approached then, saw our faces, and slowed. Jordan straightened immediately. "We're fine," he said before she could speak, and there it was. The first sign he understood what I needed him to do. Perform. She nodded and moved on. When she was gone, I leaned forward slightly. "Listen to me." He did, not because he was calm, because he was shattered enough to know he needed something stronger than his own first instinct. "You do not confront her tonight," I said. "You do not call him. You do not go home and ask questions with your face full of hurt. You do not give either of them the chance to rearrange themselves before we understand everything." His nostrils flared. "Everything? What else is there?" Enough that they felt safe being seen. That shut him up. Jordan looked down again, and this time his breathing steadied for a different reason. Not peace. Focus. The kind a person reaches for when pain becomes too large and the only way through it is to turn towards structure. I knew that shift. I had felt it myself. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We." There it was. Not forgiveness, not acceptance. Alignment. I let that sit between us for 1 second before answering. "We learn." His eyes came back to mine, red at the rims now but clear. And then we decide what they deserve after they've shown us everything. Jordan leaned back slowly. His face had changed in the last 20 minutes, not aged exactly, tightened. The open trust he had walked in with was gone. Being in its place was something harder and much more dangerous to the people who had mistaken him for blind. He nodded once. "No confrontation," he said, testing the shape of it. "No emotion," I replied. "No warning." I held his gaze. Let them feel safe. That was the decision. Not spoken as revenge, not dressed up in righteousness. Just two wounded people choosing not to hand their betrayers the mercy of advance notice. Jordan picked up his phone at last and locked the screen without looking at it. Then he set it face down on the table, like a man putting a body under a sheet. When we stood to leave, he looked those next days. Not just that Gerald and Talia had betrayed us, but that once Jordan and I stopped reacting and started watching, their carelessness began to bloom. Safety makes deceit lazy. Once liars believe the room still belongs to them, they stop checking the mirrors. Jordan played his part better than I expected. That is not praise any mother wants to give her son, but truth is not always tender. He went home that first night after our conversation and did exactly what we agreed. He did not accuse. He did not search her face for guilt. He did not ask where she had been or why she seemed distant. He moved through the house with the same measured tiredness she had clearly gotten used to stepping over. He told me later that Talia warmed almost visibly by the second day, not toward him in affection, or toward the lie in relief. She laughed easier, kept her phone face up more often, started answering his casual questions with less polish because she no longer seemed to feel watched. And then, on the third night, she almost slipped. Jordan had asked something small, what time she thought she'd be home the next evening. Nothing loaded, nothing suspicious. She answered too quickly. 7, she said, then paused, just long enough to correct herself. Or maybe later. I might have to stop somewhere first. That was all. But it was the first time her timing had needed adjustment. The first crack. Jordan didn't react. He told me that was the hardest part, not responding when his body already knew what his mind had only just confirmed. Gerald did the same with me. He became softer, if anything. More careful in small domestic ways that would have looked considerate to anyone who did not know better. He asked whether I wanted coffee in the mornings, offered to pick up dinner one evening on his way back, mentioned a weekend trip we should finally take before the holidays crept in. The nerve of that did not enrage me the way it might have earlier. By then, I had crossed into a colder place. Every kindness from him looked like strategy now. Every extra softness carried the sheen of a man keeping one life comfortable while arranging another. Jordan and I did not call each other constantly. That would have made us sloppy. We spoke briefly, carefully, and only when one of us had something concrete to add. Facts first, reactions later. Most times there wasn't room for both. The first thing that surfaced cleanly was the money. I had already noticed the smaller cash withdrawals before, but now I started checking timing against what I knew of Gerald's movements. Jordan, for his part, noticed Talia taking calls in another room more often and becoming oddly sharp whenever he asked ordinary questions about bills or their shared account. Nothing dramatic, just resistance. A charge here, a transfer there. Her explanations were always neat enough to survive one glance, not two. Then Jordan found something larger. He called me from his car one afternoon, voice low and even in the way it had become whenever he was forcing himself not to feel the full weight of what he was saying. Talia had left a folder half-zipped in the spare room they used as a home office. He had not gone digging, he said. He had gone in looking for a charger. And the folder had been opened just enough to invite the eye. That mattered, because it meant she no longer believed she needed to hide everything. He saw a printed email near the top with a property management logo across the header. He read enough. A townhouse lease, beginning in 6 weeks. In her name? I asked. A pause. No, he said. In Dad's. That sat between us. Not a hotel, not a hidden dinner bill, not one-night carelessness, a residence. Something meant to hold days, not just moments. When I asked where, he gave me the neighborhood, and I knew it immediately. Newer development, quiet streets, expensive but not flashy, the kind of place chosen by people who want comfort without questions. My fingers tightened around the phone until the edge of the case pressed into my palm. That same evening, and Gerald came home in a mood so light it almost glowed off him. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and stood in the kitchen telling me about some possible restructuring at work that might give him more flexibility in the next year. He said it casually, but not carelessly, like a man laying groundwork inside conversation, testing how a future might sound once spoken aloud. More flexibility. For whom? For what? Later that night, after he went upstairs, I opened the study drawer again and found what I had missed before, because I had not yet known where to rest my eyes. A transfer schedule, not hidden, just placed. Folded into a stack of papers where only someone who still believed in the household's innocence would skim past it. So funds being shifted out of a joint account into a separate investment vehicle Gerald had opened months earlier. Months. The timing lined up too cleanly, legal on paper, deliberate in reality. By then, the picture was no longer fragmenting in my hands, money being moved, a property being prepared, a man softening his wife while clearing space elsewhere, a daughter-in-law easing into confidence because she believed she was still at the center of her marriage. They weren't just stealing moments, they were building continuity. I sat there under the yellow desk lamp with that paper in my hand and understood the full obscenity of it at last. They weren't planning an escape, they were building a replacement, and they had already started living inside it. The truth didn't explode. It settled. That was what made it unbearable for them. We did not confront Gerald and Talia in the house. I would not give either of them the comfort of familiar walls, of rooms that still carried photographs and lamps and rugs, soft enough to absorb the sound of betrayal. People lie more easily when they are standing inside places that have protected them before. I wanted a room that belonged to process, not memory, a room with straight-back chairs, a polished table, and no emotional shelter in it. So I made the appointment with my attorney. His office sat on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building downtown, the kind of place people enter for wills, property closings, custody disputes, and other moments when life stops pretending feelings alone can govern consequences. Gerald knew the firm, and we had used it years earlier when updating estate paperwork after Jordan got married. That was intentional. I did not want him walking into unknown territory and immediately turning suspicious. I wanted him to enter just unsettled enough to keep talking, and just comfortable enough not to realize the ground beneath him had already changed. I told him there had been a discrepancy in some account documents and that I wanted us all present because a few family-linked financial questions had come up. There was a pause on the phone. Not long, but longer than it should have been. "What kind of discrepancy?" he asked. "Something I'd rather go over with everyone present," I said. Another pause. Then, "All right." Not agreement, acceptance. When Talia came, Jordan and I were already seated. That mattered. Not for drama, for position. I sat to the left of my attorney at the long conference table, with a neat stack of folders in front of me, and my hands folded over one another, calm enough now that I no longer had to perform it. Jordan sat beside me, face composed, shoulders square, a man held together by decision more than peace. Across from us, Gerald entered first, then Talia. Gerald slowed, just slightly. It was almost nothing. But it was the first time I had seen hesitation reach him before he could smooth it away. Then his eyes moved across the table, the folders, the arrangement. "Mr. Hollis." Me. "What is this?" he asked. "Sit down," I said. He didn't move immediately, not out of defiance, out of calculation. Then he pulled the chair back and sat. Talia followed a second later, slower than usual, her purse placed carefully beside her chair, as if some part of her had finally understood that this room would not hold her the way other rooms had. She looked at Jordan first. He did not look back. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Mr. Hollis did not waste language. That was one reason I had trusted him before and one reason I returned now. Men like Gerald do too well around softness. He did not begin with accusation. He began with structure. "Before we proceed," he said evenly, I want to be clear that today's meeting is being documented for record. I'll also need everyone to allow me to finish before responding so we don't create confusion about what's being presented." That was the first shift. Small, but permanent. Gerald's attention sharpened. Mr. Hollis opened the first folder and began placing documents on the table. Not dramatically, not all at once, but one at a time, spaced just enough to force attention. Joint account transfer summaries. He let those sit. Then the lease paperwork for the townhouse. Gerald's eyes moved again. Slower now. Then a timeline Jordan and I had built. Dates, movements, overlaps that no longer looked accidental when placed in order. No one spoke. Mr. Hollis didn't rush. He didn't need to. Then, finally, the photograph. He didn't slide it forward immediately, and he let the rest of the paper settle first. Then he placed it down, face up. No one spoke for several seconds. Gerald's eyes moved over the table once, then again, then finally stopped on the image. I watched recognition reach him in stages, not because he had forgotten the moment, because he understood what it meant that I had it, what it meant that I had waited. The knowledge landed in his face like age. Talia broke first, not loudly. That would have been easier. She inhaled sharply, one hand rising to her mouth, then dropping when she realized the gesture made her look exactly like what she was. Caught, not wronged. Her eyes went to Jordan, wide, searching. He gave her nothing. Gerald recovered faster. Of course he did. Men who build second lives usually spend a great deal of time rehearsing calm. "Hope," he said, using my name in that low, measured tone he used whenever he wanted to turn reason into a leash. "Whatever you think this is?" "No," I said. "Just that. One word. Quiet. Final." His mouth closed, not because he agreed, because he understood something had already moved beyond his ability to reshape it. Mr. Hollis spoke again before Gerald could regroup. "These documents," he said, "establish a pattern of undisclosed financial movement, a separate residential arrangement, and conduct that may have implications depending on how this proceeds legally." That was the second shift, not louder, but heavier. I looked at both of them, then at the papers spread across that table, and I felt no tremor in myself at all. I had cried enough in private places they would never see. What remained now was structure. "Why, you didn't just betray me," I said. I let the silence hold for half a second longer, then finished it. "You built a future on it." That sentence landed where I wanted it to, on both of them at once. Talia's composure gave way completely then. Tears came, but not in any way that moved me. There are tears that come from remorse and tears that come from collapse, and by then I knew the difference too well to confuse them. Gerald turned toward her for half a second, then back to me. And in that tiny movement I saw it. The realization, not that I knew, that I had known, for some time, and said nothing. Silence took over the room, but it wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, direction, control. And for the first time since that night in the restaurant, they were no longer in control of it. The consequences don't always make noise. They arrive in envelopes, court filings, delayed responses, and signatures that take longer than they should because someone, somewhere, is no longer in a hurry to help you. That was how it unfolded after that day in Mr. Hollis's office, not with screaming in the parking lot, not with glasses thrown against walls, not with one grand collapse dramatic enough to satisfy gossip. Real ruin, when it is earned properly, rarely announces itself. It settles. It closes doors softly. It changes who gets copied on an email, who gets called back, who gets asked to wait, who gets told politely that something will need further review, and who begins to understand that charm does not move process once truth has settled into the file. I filed for divorce within the week. It did not move quickly. That is something people don't say enough. There were delays, responses that took longer than they should have, requests for clarification that circled back on themselves. Gerald tried at first to slow things down by behaving like a man wounded by misunderstanding instead of exposed by evidence. He sent one long message that began with regret and ended with self-protection. He asked for calm, asked for privacy, asked for space to explain. Men say, explain when what they really mean is rearrange. Personality stops mattering. Every document did what emotion could not. It forced shape onto what he had hoped to keep fluid. And the money shifted too slowly for his liking after that. Transfers that once slipped by under the cover of routine were now questioned, traced, and held in place long enough to be understood. Not stopped, just slowed. That was enough. The townhouse lease did not become the fresh beginning he had planned. It became part of a record, one more sign of intent, one more piece of proof that this was not confusion, not temptation, not some sad late-life lapse he could dress up in loneliness. It was planning. It was diversion. It was a second life being furnished quietly while the first was still being funded. That cost him. Not all at once. That would have been mercy. A board appointment he had expected to renew did not. No explanation, just no. And a partnership he had been leaning toward for months shifted direction after what he later described as internal review. No accusation, just distance. Nobody called him a disgrace in public. Nobody needed to. Respectability doesn't collapse in noise. It erodes in how people begin to handle you, more carefully, more formally, like a risk. Talia lost differently. Jordan did not create a spectacle around her, and I was proud of him for that in ways I never said aloud. He ended the marriage cleanly, but not easily. There were conversations that went nowhere, silences that stretched longer than either of them expected, moments where she tried to explain, and he realized explanation no longer had a place to land. No pleading, no performance, just withdrawal. By then, whatever she had believed would protect her had already started thinning. Gerald was dealing with his own consequences. The secrecy that had once made her feel chosen now left her standing inside the practical cost of being known. She moved out quietly, not immediately, not dramatically, just gradually less present until one day she wasn't there anymore. No one in the family called. No one asked her to come back and explain herself into a place she had already burned through. Jordan took longer. That was honest. People like to pretend men recover from humiliation by getting harder, louder, faster. My son did none of that. He got quieter first. He moved through a few months like a man relearning the weight of ordinary things. Sleep, appetite, trust, silence in a house that no longer held the same shape. And there were days he didn't answer the phone. Days he did and said very little. Days where anger came and left just as quickly because it had nowhere useful to go. But he kept moving. That was the part I watched most carefully. He kept going to work, kept paying attention, kept showing up. Slowly, so slowly you could miss it if you were impatient, the grief stopped sitting in his shoulders. It loosened. He laughed one afternoon at something small I said over lunch, and the sound of it startled both of us. As for me, I did not come out of it triumphant. I came out of it clear. There is a difference. I stopped measuring my power by whether I could make them suffer, and started measuring it by how little access they had to my peace. Gerald no longer entered my home, not because I argued, because the terms changed. Everything went through counsel, everything went through record, everything had a boundary. He adjusted. He had to. People always do when access is removed. I did not destroy him. Jordan did not destroy her. We simply stopped standing in the places that made their betrayal sustainable. And once we moved, the structure they built could no longer hold itself up. It wasn't taken from them. It collapsed without us. He thought he could build a new legacy without anyone noticing. What he didn't understand was this.